It was a warm, sunny afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, on July 21st. The air was thick with humidity, and the cicadas were singing their incessant summer song. The beautiful Victorian house that Rachel inherited from her grandmother was tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street. Rachel had always admired the house's charm and elegance, but there was one item inside that captivated her more than anything else: the grand antique mirror in the parlor. Rachel had always felt a strange connection to the mirror. Its ornate, gilded frame was decorated with intricate carvings of vines and flowers, and the glass itself had a peculiar, almost hypnotic sheen. She had often wondered about the mirror's origins, but her grandmother had been tight-lipped about its history, only ever saying that it was a family heirloom. As Rachel unpacked the last of her boxes, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Moving into her grandmother's old house marked a new chapter in her life, a chance to start fresh after a difficult year. Little did she know this house held secrets that would soon unravel her sense of reality. That evening, after arranging her belongings and making the house feel more like home, Rachel decided to take a closer look at the mirror. As she stood before it, she noticed something peculiar. Her reflection seemed delayed, as if there were a slight lag between her movements and the image in the glass. She chalked it up to exhaustion and dismissed it. The first night in the house was uneventful, but the following morning brought with it a sense of unease. As Rachel was brushing her teeth, she noticed a small handprint on the lower corner of the mirror. It was too small to be hers, and she had no children. A chill ran down her spine, but she quickly wiped it away, convincing herself it was just an old smudge she hadn't noticed before. As the days passed, Rachel began to experience increasingly unsettling occurrences. At first, it was subtle things, objects slightly out of place, the feeling of being watched, and strange noises in the night. One evening, as she was reading in the parlor, she saw a flicker of movement in the mirror. She looked up to see her reflection staring back at her, but something was off. The eyes in the reflection seemed darker, almost malevolent. Panic set in as she realized the reflection was smiling, even though her own face was still and serious. She quickly looked away, her heart racing. She tried to rationalize it, blaming it on stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. Determined to uncover the truth, Rachel decided to research the mirror's history. She spent hours at the local library, combing through old records and family documents. She discovered that the mirror had been passed down through generations, and each owner had experienced mysterious and tragic events. The more she read, the more she realized that the mirror was no ordinary antique. It was a conduit for something dark and sinister. One night, unable to sleep, Rachel sat in front of the mirror, determined to confront whatever was lurking within it. She lit candles around the room, their flickering light casting eerie shadows on the walls. She took a deep breath and stared into the mirror, her own reflection gazing back at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. To her horror, the reflection began to change. The features morphed into something grotesque and demonic, the eyes glowing with a fiery red light. The mouth twisted into a sinister grin, and a voice that was not her own echoed in the room. "I am Nereza, bound to this mirror by your ancestors. You cannot escape me, Rachel." Rachel's blood ran cold. She tried to look away, but her gaze was locked on the reflection, unable to break free. The demon's voice continued, filling her with a sense of dread. "Your grandmother knew of my presence but chose to ignore it. Now it is your turn to suffer." Rachel felt a surge of anger. She would not let this demon control her. She remembered the old journals she had found in the attic, detailing rituals and spells meant to banish dark entities. With newfound determination, she raced to the attic and retrieved the journals. She spent the next several days preparing for the ritual. She gathered the necessary ingredients and meticulously followed the instructions. As the sun set on the 5th day, Rachel stood before the mirror, ready to face Nereza. She drew a circle of salt around herself in the mirror, then lit the candles and began to chant the incantation. The air grew thick with tension, and the room seemed to darken as if the very light was being sucked away. The reflection in the mirror began to twist and contort, the demon fighting against the power of the ritual. Rachel's voice grew stronger, fueled by her fear and determination. The demon's screams filled the room, a cacophony of rage and agony. The mirror shook violently, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. Just as she felt she could not continue any longer, a blinding light filled the room, and the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. The room fell silent, the air still and heavy. Rachel collapsed to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. She had done it. She had banished Nereza. But as she sat there, catching her breath, she noticed something that made her heart sink. The pieces of the shattered mirror were slowly moving, inching toward each other as if drawn by an invisible force. Panic set in as she realized the ritual had not fully banished the demon. It had only weakened it. She watched in horror as the mirror began to reassemble itself, piece by piece. Rachel knew she had to act fast. She gathered the pieces and wrapped them in a cloth, determined to find a way to destroy the mirror once and for all. She drove to the outskirts of Savannah, to an old abandoned church she had read about in her grandmother's journals. It was said to be a place of great power, where dark forces could be vanquished. As she entered the church, she felt a sense of foreboding. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, but she pressed on. She placed the wrapped mirror pieces on the altar and began to chant once more, calling upon the ancient forces to aid her. The ground shook, and the air crackled with electricity. The mirror pieces glowed with an unholy light, the demon fighting against its destruction. Rachel poured all her energy into the ritual, willing the mirror to be destroyed. The pieces began to melt, the dark energy dissipating into the air. Just as she thought she had succeeded, a powerful force threw her back, and she hit the ground hard. Dazed, she looked up to see the mirror fully reassembled, glowing with a dark, malevolent energy. Nereza's voice filled the church, mocking and triumphant. "You cannot destroy me, Rachel. I am bound to you now, forever." Rachel's heart sank. She had failed. She knew she could not escape the demon's grasp, but she refused to give in. She stood, her body aching, and faced the mirror one last time. "If I cannot destroy you, then I will contain you," she whispered, her voice filled with resolve. She took the mirror and buried it deep beneath the church's foundation, hoping the sacred ground would keep the demon at bay. As she covered the mirror with dirt, she felt a strange sense of calm. It was not over, but she had bought herself time. Rachel left the church, the weight of her ordeal heavy on her shoulders. She returned to her grandmother's house, unsure of what the future held. She knew that Nereza was still out there, waiting for a chance to escape. The mirror's influence might be contained for now, but it was only a matter of time before the demon found a way to break free. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel tried to return to a semblance of normalcy. But the memory of the mirror and the demon's voice haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that Nereza was always just beyond the veil, waiting. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard a faint whisper. Her heart raced as she recognized the voice. "Rachel, I am still here." She sat up, her eyes scanning the dark room. There, in the corner, she saw a glint of light. It was a shard of the mirror she had missed, lying forgotten on the floor. She picked it up, her reflection staring back at her with eyes that were not her own. The connection had never been severed. Nereza was still with her, bound to her soul. Rachel's heart filled with dread as she realized the battle was far from over. The mirror might have been buried, but the demon's influence remained. Rachel knew she had to find a way to truly banish Nereza, to free herself from the demonic presence that haunted her. She would seek out other mystics, other sources of knowledge, and continue the fight. But for now, she was trapped in a living nightmare, unsure of when or if she would ever be free. The cicadas outside continued their song, oblivious to the darkness that lurked within the old Victorian house. And so Rachel's story remained unfinished, an ongoing struggle against the shadows that sought to consume her. In the quiet of the Savannah night, the house stood as a silent witness to the battle between light and dark, a battle that Rachel was determined to win no matter the cost.